Let's talk about the question that keeps a lot of people stuck before they even begin. Am I too old for law school? I've heard this from people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They'll say things like, I haven't been in the classroom in 20 years. Everybody else is going to be younger, smarter, and faster. It's too late to start over. I've got a mortgage, a kids, a full time job. How could I possibly fit all of this in? Now, here is the truth. Those concerns are completely valid. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're not making excuses here. You're asking real questions that deserve real answers. But just because those fears are common doesn't mean that they're true. You are not too old. You are not behind. You are right where you should be. Law school is not just for 22-year-olds who live off ramen and have zero responsibilities. In fact, older applicants, so-called non-traditional students, have some of the highest success rates in law school. Reason being, they've got skills that most traditional law students haven't had the time to develop yet. Things like managing time without anybody babysitting you, being able to write clearly under pressure, speaking with confidence to people in positions of authority, juggling work, family, health, finances, and still showing up every single day. These are not soft skills, they are survival skills, and they are exactly what law school and being a lawyer actually requires. Now, I'm going to be blunt with you, law school is hard, but being 40 or 50 or 60 or even 30 isn't what makes it hard. What makes law school hard is walking in without a plan, without support, and without the maturity to handle setbacks. And if you're in your 30s or 40s or beyond, you already do have that maturity. You've already handled things way harder, like job loss, parenting, health scares, difficult bosses, major life changes, and law school will test you, but it's not going to break you. And if you're thinking, will admissions officers even take me seriously? The answer is absolutely yes. In fact, many of them prefer candidates who have more life experience because you're more likely to finish what you start. You're more likely to contribute meaningfully to classroom discussions and actually use your degree instead of treating law school like a backup plan. So if you're even considering law school and you're over 30 or 40, let me be clear, you do belong in law school. Not in spite of your age, but because of everything you've learned along the way. Now let's dig into the biggest myth that keeps people over 30 or 40 out of law school. The idea that somehow age is a disadvantage. That admissions is sitting in a room thinking to themselves, why would we take somebody who's 45 when we could admit some 22-year-old with a 4.0 GPA? Now, let me tell you exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Every law school admissions committee wants three things: people who will succeed in law school, people who will pass the bar exam, and people who will actually use their degree and reflect well on the school after graduation. That is the game. And when you're older, when you're more experienced, and when you're clear on why you want to go to law school, you actually check all three of those boxes better than many younger applicants. Because when you're older, you're not applying to law school on a whim. You're not going just because everybody else is going or because you don't know what else to do after undergrad. You're going because you've got a purpose, and that shows up everywhere in your application. Your personal statement's more focused, your interviews are more confident, and your answers are grounded in real-world experience, not just classroom theory. You know who you are, and you're not afraid to say it. And that kind of clarity is powerful, and it's also rare. Also, I want you to think about what law school is really asking of students. They want you to read hundreds of pages a week. They want you to write clearly and persuasively under pressure, to analyze complex problems that have no clear answers. They want you to be able to speak up in front of a room full of smart people and manage constant deadlines while staying calm and focused. If this sounds familiar, and it should, it's because if you've had any kind of real career, you've already done those things. Maybe not in a courtroom, but definitely in meetings, reports, negotiations, and high-stakes projects. Now compare that to a KJD, a 22-year-old who hasn't had a boss, never missed rent, never handled a real crisis, and they're going to ask who's more prepared. And so your age, if you're older, is not a weakness, it is a filter. If you're applying at 45, you've already proven that you're serious. You're not chasing prestige. You're not here for the frat parties. You're here to learn, to grow, and to make your career count. And that is what law schools want. Now, here's something else. Law schools want a diverse incoming class, diversity of background, race, life experience, and age. And a classroom full of younger people only with the same major and the same worldview isn't just boring, it's actually bad for legal education. You're going to add value by showing up with a different lens, and you're going to help your classmates grow too. And so if you've ever worried about being the oldest person in the room, I want you to flip that mindset. You're not the outlier, you are the anchor because you've been through real things. You've made mistakes. You've solved problems under pressure. And that's what law school is training you for, and that's what you already bring to the table. Now let's get even more specific here. I want you to stop thinking of your age or your experience as something you need to apologize for on your application. Because law school is not just about who can memorize cases. It's about who can think, communicate, and navigate high-pressure situations without falling apart. And that's where real-world experience gives you an edge that's hard to teach. Now, let me give you a real example. One of my students, we'll call her Angela, she was in her early 40s when she started law school. She had a full-time job, 2 kids, a mortgage, and she was juggling more in one day than most of her classmates had ever dealt with. And midway through her first semester, one of her professors moved up a major deadline with no warning. The younger students freaked out, they were complaining in the group chat, they were pulling all-nighters and panicking, but Angela just opened up her calendar, moved a few things around, and then she walked into her professor's office, calmly explained her situation, and requested an extension with a backup plan for how she would stay on track. And the professor just gave it to her without any pushback. Not because she was older, but because she knew how to communicate clearly, manage expectations, and present a solution. And that's what experience looks like. Now, you don't have to have a prestigious background to bring real-world value to law school. You don't have to be a CEO or have 20 years at a law-adjacent nonprofit. You could have worked in retail management as a teacher, in healthcare and logistics, as a stay-at-home parent, or run your own business. Doesn't matter. All of those experiences have a couple of key things in common: decision-making, conflict resolution, clear communication, time management, and learning how to deal with unexpected problems. If this sounds familiar, it's because these are the same skills your professors are going to want in the classroom and your future clients are going to demand in the real world. And so when you bring those with you into law school, you're not playing catch up. You're already fluent in the language of responsibility. And your classmates might know the case law better on day one, and that's fine. But you're going to be the one they come to when the pressure's on because they know that you're not going to crumble. So let's talk strategy when it comes to admissions, because if you are an older applicant, there are going to be parts of the admissions process that do look different when you're applying later in life. And if you understand this up front, you can plan for these differences and turn them into advantages. First, your undergraduate GPA. If you graduated from law school 10, 20, maybe even 30 years ago, your transcript might feel like ancient history and maybe it's not your proudest moment. Maybe you struggled or switched majors, and that's okay. Admissions officers are trained to read for context. They know that who you were at 19 is not who you are at 45. In fact, they're often going to de-emphasize your old GPA if you can show a strong track record of more recent success, like professional accomplishments, career advancement, writing samples that show clarity and logic, or any continuing education since undergrad. In other words, law schools will discount your undergraduate GPA in favor of your more recent experiences. Now let's talk about letters of recommendation, because if you worry that you haven't spoken to a college professor in decades, that's okay. You don't need academic references from several years ago. Law schools are flexible. If you can't get one from a professor, ask for someone who can speak to your intellectual ability, your work ethic, writing skills, leadership, judgment, and your ability to grow when challenged. And all of this could be from folks in the workforce. And so if you've had a manager, a supervisor, a client, or collaborator who can speak to those qualities, use them, especially if you've worked closely with them or you solved difficult problems together. The key is to be intentional. Choose people who know you well, who respect you, and who are willing to write specifically. You don't want generic letters. Now, let's talk about your resume. If you've been working for 15, 20, 30 years, it is okay if your resume is longer than one page. The one page rule is more for 22-year-olds who don't have quite as much work experience yet. But if you're older, you've had a career, maybe multiple, you've led teams or launched projects, you can't shrink that down to only a couple of bullet points. But your resume should still be focused, and you want to use it to build a narrative. You want to highlight roles and accomplishments that show growth, responsibility, and relevance to legal thinking. That might mean emphasizing leadership positions, writing or analytical roles, experience navigating rules, regulations, or compliance issues, jobs that required negotiation, research, or advocacy, and any public speaking or training that you've done. Now, you do want to cut away the fluff and focus only on the parts of your story that support your decision to go to law school now. And same goes for your personal statement, by the way. You don't need to explain everything you've ever done, just tell a focused story. Like, what led you to choose law school now? What have you done that proves that you're ready? And what will you bring to your future classmates and the legal field? Your idea here is to show a pattern, not just laundry list your jobs. So let's say you get into law school, you're sitting in a first-year contracts class, and you're thinking, what did I just sign up for? And I know that walking into law school later in life could feel awkward at first. There will be moments where you question whether you belong, but once the semester actually gets going, everybody, no matter their age, is going to be humbled by the demands of law school. They're going to hit a wall. They're going to have that moment where they read a case 3 times and can't figure out what the court is talking about. That is law school, and as an older applicant, you already know how to get through hard things without spiraling. You've probably had bosses who demanded impossible things and dealt with unclear expectations. And that is what law school is. It is uncomfortable by design. Professors are going to cold call you. You'll be expected to argue both sides of a case, and you'll be told there's no right answer, but still be graded as if there is. The younger students are often still figuring out how to manage failure without falling apart, but you already have those tools because you've been through real life, and that is not something you can cram for. And when it comes to classroom discussions, one of the biggest advantages you bring is your perspective. If you've worked in healthcare, education, or business, or even raised a family, that lived experience gives you insight into how laws play out in real life, not just how they're written. And so when you speak up in class, you're not just talking in hypotheticals. You can say, actually, I dealt with a case like this when I was managing HR at my old job, or I saw this kind of legal issue come up when I worked in real estate. In other words, you bring context, and professors love that. Now let's talk social life for a second, because this is where most non-traditional students think they're going to be left out. And you might not vibe with a crowd who's partying every Thursday night, but law school social life isn't just parties. You're going to find people you connect with through study groups, clubs, or even just shared values. And there are more non-traditional students than you probably realize. There are parents, career changers, veterans, students who took years off to work, people going to law school at night while working full-time, and many law schools now have dedicated student organizations for non-traditional students. And if they don't, you could start one. Law schools love students who build community and take on leadership roles. And the reality is that everybody in law school is struggling in some way. Everybody is under pressure. And everybody wants someone who gets it. And more often than not, younger students appreciate the calm, grounded energy that older law students bring. They're going to look to you for perspective. Now, the one thing that stops more non-traditional law school applicants than anything else is the LSAT. It's usually not the GPA or the essays or even the cost. It's fear of the LSAT. And if you've been out of school for 10, 15, or 30 years, it makes sense because you might not have taken a standardized test in decades. You might not remember the last time you studied with flashcards or took timed practice tests. And when you hear things like, this test is harder than the SAT, or you need a top percentile score just to be competitive, the anxiety kicks in. So yes, the LSAT is challenging, and yes, you probably feel rusty at first, and yes, you may have to work harder to rebuild test-taking stamina, but none of that means that you can't succeed. I've worked with students in their 40s, 50s, even 60s who crushed the LSAT, not because they had a photographic memory or magical test-taking skills, because they approached it with discipline. They didn't wing it, they didn't cram, they didn't burn out after 3 days of studying. They treated it like a job, like training for a marathon. They built a system and they followed it. That means studying for a couple hours a day consistently instead of 10 hours once a week. It means doing focused drills, not just timed tests, so that you actually build skills. It also means reviewing your mistakes deeply so you don't repeat them. It means tracking your progress to make sure you're improving week by week and practicing endurance. But first and foremost, you begin studying for the LSAT by building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. Now, you don't have to score a 175 to get into a great law school. There are nearly 200 ABA-approved law schools in the US, and many of them welcome non-traditional applicants, and they look at your application holistically. That means your LSAT score is just one piece of the puzzle. If you can combine a solid LSAT score with strong essays, a thoughtful resume, great letters of rec, and a clear sense of purpose, it's often more persuasive than a 172 from somebody who has no idea why they're applying, because getting the best score is of course worth it because it leads to better odds of admission, more scholarship money, and more options when it comes to choosing the right school for you. But don't think of yourself as being bad at tests. Just realize that you're out of practice, and that's a huge difference because being out of practice means you just haven't done it in a while, and that's fixable. You can get better at this. You can train your brain to move faster through dense reading passages. You can learn how to spot flaws in arguments, not overnight, but week by week with a focused plan. And so the mindset shift for you here is, rather than asking, can I do this? It's, do I want this badly enough to figure it out? And if the answer is yes, then guess what? You will. Excuse me, folks, I'm still getting over a cold. Happy to get to all of your questions, anything LSAT and law school admissions. I've seen some questions here coming in through the chat here, and so I'll get to as many as I can. I am getting over a little bit of a cold though, and so if I'm a little bit slower than usual, I apologize for that. If I have to clear my throat, I apologize for that. But I do see questions coming in here on YouTube and on TikTok. I'll get to as many of these questions coming in as I can. Feel free to drop them here in the chat. Now or later, I see a ton of them coming in. Let's see here. What to Wear Shop is asking, do you suggest customizing my personal essay for every school that I apply to? To the extent that you need to, yes. And so I don't recommend writing a separate, unique essay for every single school. I think that's more work than is necessary. But if you look at the prompts, then of course you can make minor tweaks, but keep the same core substance or core essay story that you're telling. Does that make sense? The idea being that you have a core story you want to tell, you have a core anecdote that you're starting off with, and then based on the prompt that the school is asking for, you make minor small adjustments based on the particular way that they ask their question. But usually I find that you can typically tweak your essay to the particulars of the school and what they're asking for. Mikey's asking, is 1 letter of rec from a professor and 2 from employers okay for a letter of recommendation for a KJD? Yeah, totally fine. If you are a KJD though, I would try to get 2 from professors because your employer letters would then just be from summer internships, right? Because if you're going directly, they haven't supervised you full-time for a longer period of time unless you've been working during school, in which case, of course, yeah, then it would be more, they'd have more context on your experience, and that would be helpful. Meditation Jay's asking, can you talk about ABA accredited online programs? Yeah, so there are a handful of them. They're becoming more popular over time as the ABA is little by little approving them, but they typically have provisional accreditation. There's Mitchell Hamlin, there's Syracuse, there's St. Mary's as just a few of them. There's a lot of demand for these because there are more people who want to go to these online schools than there are schools available offering these programs. And so the requirements to get in are typically higher than for going to the school in person. In other words, going online for total online 100% JD or hybrid, it's a bit tougher to get in. So note the medians and adjust accordingly. Jericho Jet is saying, I'm a 52-year-old paralegal going to law school next year. Awesome. Love to see it. I'm glad you're here. That's why I shared what I did about applying as a non-traditional student. I think that paralegal experience is great. Just highlight it in your essays. I see Passion says that she's 49 taking the LSAT next year. This is motivating, awesome passion. Glad you found it helpful as well. Denisha says, I'm a 34-year-old non-traditional student taking the LSAT in January, scoring mid-150s with a 3.9 GPA. This is so helpful. Awesome. Glad to hear it. 3.9 GPA is killer. You want to balance it out with, you got a great GPA. Try to match that with a killer LSAT. You still got a month to pull up your LSAT score significantly. And so I'm glad that you're here. You're in the right place. And by the way, folks, if you are studying for the LSAT in January, February, April, June, or beyond, you're looking for help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this now or later. You can book that free lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody out there now and later to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally. And if you were trying to book that call the other day and weren't able to get through, I think there was an issue with the link in the TikTok bio. Please try again. I think we fixed the link and it's working better now. We had some issues with the TikTok integration, but if you were trying to book it before and couldn't before, please try again now and hopefully you'll have some more success with it. Cheska Bar is asking, what prep resources or courses do you recommend for someone balancing work and life? And so at LSAT Unplugged, we actually offer personalized LSAT coaching programs specifically for students to fit their schedules. And so it's not a one size fits all. We personalize every program for the individual student. And so what you can do is you can book that free call with me through the link in bio, and we'll be able to help you craft a personal plan of attack to fit your schedule. Given that you're balancing LSAT prep with other obligations, we'll help you craft a schedule that's both reasonable, but keeps you on track to meet your goals. And so you can book that call with me. We personalize every program to the individual student. Other questions here. User 5500 is asking, what's considered an okay LSAT range? Okay is relative, right? Good is relative. It always depends on the school and is relative to the goals in terms of what schools you're trying to get into. In my personal opinion, I recommend aiming for at least a 160, 165 at minimum for any law school worth attending. The schools that will accept you with a lower LSAT score, in my view, typically are not worth going to because of their low rankings, low bar passage rates, and the fact that you would not get as much scholarship money for those schools if you have a lower LSAT score. And so when you apply with a higher LSAT score, that allows you to get into better law schools and also gets you more scholarship money, which means you can take on less debt, possibly no debt at all, and you can get better employment outcomes upon graduating. And so no matter what I say, I want you to have at least a 160, 165 at minimum. Of course, there are schools you can get into with lower LSAT scores, and if you don't need to go to a well-ranked school or you don't need scholarship money, you can just afford to pay full price, then of course that may be a unique, different situation. But otherwise, I'd say you want to aim for the highest LSAT score possible. And really, I always say, why not aim for a 180? Cheskabar is asking, is the LSAT considered harder or easier now compared to the pre-2020 versions? And so a bit of LSAT history for all of you. Prior to 2020, the LSAT was in person. After the pandemic, they moved it online. They also shortened it. And since then, they've even removed the logic games section and replaced it with the second logical reasoning section. And you could take it on the computer from home or in person at a testing center, but it's no longer on paper. And so all of this to say, I think the LSAT is easier because without logic games being on the test, there's less material to study. And you can narrow your focus to focus just on logical reasoning and reading comprehension. Also, taking it on your own device at home might be a more comfortable setting than in person with a bunch of other people around you. So maybe less stressful. We are seeing LSAT score inflation as well these days, meaning a lot of folks are getting higher LSAT scores than in the past, possibly because of the removal of logic games and because of the fact that you're able to take it from home without the stress of the testing center. Davion's asking, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, is if you want to go into academia, is T5 the route to go? Yeah, so if you want to go into academia to work in legal scholarship as a law professor, for example, then I would say that you probably want to go to a more elite law school like Chicago or Yale, for example. I think they have a better track record of getting students into the ivory tower or legal academia specifically. Gabe is asking, starting at a 150 LSAT cold full test, What's a realistic score after 6 months of studying 20 hours per week? So 20 hours a week over the course of 6 months, I mean, the sky's the limit. If I told you that you couldn't improve, would you believe me? And would that be discouraging to you? Don't take what I say in any regard, right? But I will say to you that on the positive note, I think the sky's the limit and there's no reason that you couldn't get a 180 in all seriousness. The amount that you improve is a function of the way of how much you study and the way in which you study, right? So if you just bang your head against the wall and take test after test without reviewing, you might not improve that much. Alternatively, if you build a solid foundation in the different sections, the different question types, and then beyond that, you review your mistakes in depth, you put in 20 hours a week for 6 months, that becomes nearly 500 hours or more. There's no reason that you couldn't achieve perfection. And again, if you want my help, I'm happy to talk you through a personal plan of attack. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help you out. V is asking, would you recommend retaking a 173 if the goal is a T6? What's your GPA? If your GPA is a 4.0, might not be worth it. If your GPA is below a 3.5, I would say absolutely. If it's in between those two numbers, then maybe. I'm also curious, how much time can you put in between now and your retake, and what were your practice test scores like before? Might be worth retaking, crazy enough to say, but there's still 7 points between a 173 and 180, and so there is still potential for you to improve. Might not be a bad idea to retake it if you think that you could do better. You're saying a GPA is 4.0, that's awesome. If you've got a month to study between now and January, though, maybe you go for it. Because the T14 LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. And so if you could get a 175, 176, that combined with a 4.0 would improve your odds a bit. If you could get a 177, improve your odds even more. Guy at Lover is asking, do I need to read a bunch of books to improve my reading skills for the LSAT? It certainly wouldn't hurt. But to improve your reading skills for the LSAT, the best way to improve is to read actual LSAT materials, like actual LSAT reading comprehension passages. There are nearly 400 released LSAT reading comprehension passages, and so if you read even the oldest 100 in the older exams, that would give you some more exposure to the sort of difficult, dense text that the LSAT tests you on, and it would improve your reading abilities. I don't think that you need to read non-LSAT stuff if you're taking the LSAT in the next year or two. I would just stick with official LSAT materials, no reason to go beyond that. Denisha's asking, I took the LSAT in February and got a 150. What if I retake and score lower? No big deal, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on record. And so there's no downside. Of course, I hope that you do better on a retake, and I would expect that you will. But if you didn't, no big deal. You could always retake it again. You could take it in January. You could take it again in February. You could take it again in April. The only retake limit is 5 times in 5 years and 7 times for life. And so use all the takes that you have available to you if you need them to achieve your fullest potential, to achieve your goals. The fact that law schools no longer average out multiple LSAT scores and have not done so for nearly 20 years is amazing, because it gives you more at-bats, more opportunities to improve. Law Actrice is asking, what's the most improvement you've seen coming from the high 140s, and how long did the student study? So we had a student who went from a 145 to a 175. I think it was over the course of 2 to 3 months. And that's not a promise or a guarantee that you'll experience similar. Of course, your results may vary. But I share that to show you what's possible when you change your approach and study the right way. So take that as one example, as motivation, to know that it is possible to improve significantly when you study more efficiently. I see V is actually an example as well. She's saying she went from 148 to 173. Congrats, V, that's an awesome improvement. excited to see you do even better if you do choose to retake. And so, yeah, I'll choose if you want my support getting up from the high 140s, or V, if you want my support going up from 173, then of course I'm happy to help you out. You can book that free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. And by the way, folks, if you find these sorts of live streams helpful, I do this every single weekday at this same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. You can please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost lives because they can't run ads during these. And so I really do appreciate your support sharing this on your socials, for example, or sharing it in a group chat with anybody else you know who's studying for the LSAT. One Piece is real saying, I'm at a 153. I just want a 170 or a 165. I mean, 12 to 17 points as an improvement is very doable. A lot easier than improving 30 points, of course. It just requires targeting your weak areas, drilling down on those, and focusing. Just scanning through here for a lot of all the other questions coming in. Aurelia is asking, if I were to take the February exam and do well enough to apply, do a lot of schools take that one? Yeah, a lot of schools do. I mean, the cycle has extended over time such that what used to be considered late is no longer considered late. As schools wait and wait longer to make decisions, as they wait to see who else is coming along, they're typically just not answering people who apply in the fall. They're just holding off on giving them any sort of answer or acknowledgement, which is not polite, of course, but it is what it is, right? So ultimately, what you've got to do is just apply when you're ready, when you've reached your goal score, ideally. That's when you send in your applications. Don't be impatient to submit. A lot of what you're hearing out there is outdated, bad advice from a couple of decades ago that no longer applies. Ion's asking, I scored a 133 on my diagnostic. I have a year. If I have like a year and a half, could I get to 165? Yeah, I mean, you could get there in less than a year and a half, of course, but if you are allowing yourself a year and a half, I mean, the sky's the limit. I would aim even higher. And set out a schedule for yourself where you're going to block off a couple hours a week. Even that alone for now is enough time for you to make steady forward progress and improve little by little. And then maybe you'll decide, you know what, you want to take it in the summer instead and take it in 6 or 7 months instead of a year from now and just knock it out of the way, get it done, and move on. But craft a plan of attack, get the official LSAT practice tests, make a schedule for yourself, and set an agenda for what you're going to do to get there. Steven's asking, what do I think is a healthy amount of schools to apply to for this cycle? I was aiming for 15. This might sound crazy, but I think the more the better, honestly. As long as you can get the essays together and stay organized with all the essays you need to submit, if you can handle the application fees, and by the way, you can request LSAT, you can request application fee waivers, and schools will often waive the application fees. If you can swing and navigate all of that logistically, I think the more schools you apply to, the better, because you give yourself more at-bats, you give yourself more exposure, and you increase the surface area of luck. In other words, the more schools you apply to, the more yeses you can get, the more scholarships you can get, and the more negotiation leverage that you will have. And so to apply to 15, 20, 25 schools, I think is not insane. It might be a lot of work, but it's worth doing, because even if you apply to, let's say, 8 reach schools, 8 target schools, 8 safety schools, so reach schools being where you're a bit below the numbers, target being where you're on point with the numbers, and safety where you're above the numbers. 8 in each of those categories, it's 24 schools. That, when you divide it up that way, I think it sounds more reasonable. And if you apply to 8 reaches, maybe you get into one of them, and maybe you happen to have the right background, the right credentials, the right experience where they would actually give you scholarships even though you were reaching. And then you could get a scholarship to a school where you were below the numbers, but you got it anyway with scholarship money. And then you can also play the schools off each other to get more money, maybe even get a full ride. There are 200 ABA approved law schools in the US for context. And you could blanket your entire region. For example, if you're in New York City, there's a lot of schools in the tri-state area. You could apply to all of them and maximize your odds and not even have to relocate. Alec is asking, how are your LSAT courses structured? So typically we set you up with private one-on-one coaching on a consistent basis. We give you access to live small group sessions 4 nights a week, all optional, all recorded for any that you can't make. You also get our comprehensive on-demand course and a custom study plan as well. So that's the broad overview of how we tend to structure our programs. As for the particulars, we look at your current score, your goal score, and your time frame, meaning when you're taking the LSAT. And that's how we decide the specifics ultimately. And if you want to talk through your situation, I can craft for you a personal plan of attack. You can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, in the bio on TikTok as well. And the investment in the program depends on all those particulars, and so we can talk through it when you book the free call with me. Penny's asking, how would you look for a tutor? Well, I'm right here, dude. I'm right here. I'm happy to help. So yeah, of course, if you're looking for tutoring, you can, of course, book that free call with me as well, and I'm happy to talk you through some options. And Lala Hater, yes, I do offer one-on-one coaching, link below the video. The calls are typically, we open up calls just a couple days in advance. And so if you want to book for today or for Monday, if there's slots open, feel free to book. If you don't see anything available, you can shoot me a text or a DM, and I'll see if I can squeeze you in here or there. Just Dylan's asking, can you attend a high-ranking law school with no debt? Yeah, it's possible if you get really good numbers. And so the way that you get scholarship money and you avoid taking on debt for law school is that you apply with numbers above the medians of the schools to which you're applying. And so if a school has an LSAT median of a 170 and a GPA median of a 3.7, let's say, if you apply with an LSAT above 170 and a GPA above 3.7, then because you are strong relative to their numbers, then they are more likely to give you scholarship money. And the higher you are above the numbers, the more likely you are to get more scholarship money and potentially even a full ride, which means you pay zero debt. And that's how you do it. It's as simple as that. The law school admissions process is primarily numbers driven, unlike undergrad admissions where softs play a larger factor. And by the way, the reason for that is because of the ever important US News Law School rankings. For some reason, everybody in the legal academic world is obsessed with the US News rankings, even though nobody cares what US News has to say for really any other reason, but people pay attention to the rankings, so it's kind of circular. People care because other people care, and so on. But that's not changing anytime soon, I think. And so if you want, you got to consider both prestige of the school and then the scholarships that you're getting. Typically, if you're looking for academia or big law, for example, prestige matters more. If you're looking to work at a more regional law firm, not any fancy big law brand name firm, then it might not matter quite as much. If you want to open your own practice, of course, it doesn't matter quite as much either. And so you might then want to go for scholarship money and devote less attention to the prestige factor. Got a question from Passion here asking, I took some time off of school due to medical reasons and my GPA was low, but when I came back after recovery, my last 5 classes were A's. Will schools look at my improvements positively? Yeah, absolutely. So law schools love to see an upward trend in your transcript. Better to have lower GPA followed by higher GPA than vice versa. And so, yeah, they will look at that positively. And of course, a medical reason is a totally valid reason to have a relatively lower GPA in the short term. And so for that reason, I would say it would be wise for you to write an addendum explaining the reason for the low GPA, explain the medical factor. But then, of course, yeah, I mean, upward trend is great. They love to see that. And then, of course, just give it your all to get the highest possible LSAT score to show them what you're capable of in the academic side as well in that regard. Shad Karzan is asking, if I've got a 3.8 GPA, what LSAT should I reach for in pursuit of a T20? Always aim for 180. Always aim for 180 is my real answer. If you want a more concrete, specific, data-driven answer, you could look at what are the T20 LSAT medians. But a lot of those are going to be in the 170 range, even with a 3.8 GPA, just because grade inflation is crazy. And so a lot of other folks will have a 3.8, and it's more common to have a 3.8 than it is to have a 170 plus. So go for the 170 plus. And of course, just aim to understand everything. Give it the time that it needs to achieve your fullest potential. Alex asking, do I think getting from 161 in November to 165 in January is realistic? Yeah, I mean, 4 points. You want 4 points in a month from now? That's less than a point a week. We've got roughly 5 weeks till the test in January. If we could get you 1 or 2 points a week, you'll be well past that. And it's a lot easier to go from a 161 to a 165 than from a 171 to a 175. So yeah, you're in good shape there. And if you haven't already, Alec, book the free call with me and we could talk through that more. The link's in my bio. Free LSAT tutoring lesson. Reeves is asking, will graduate school GPA be considered? Sadly, not really. They'll be able to see it, of course, but when it comes to actually crunching the numbers, they only look at undergraduate GPA, not graduate, in part because not everybody has a graduate GPA. Not everybody went to graduate school, but everyone applying to law school has been to undergrad. And the undergrad GPA is what is factored into the ABA 509 report, which is in turn where US News gets their data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. Scanning through, I apologize if I've missed any questions in the chat. I'm going to try and circle back to those here. Davion's asking, I plan on applying to the Rhodes and Marshall scholarships. Should I take the LSAT before I get them? Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't see those two things as being connected necessarily. I mean, it's one thing to apply to scholarships. It's another to actually receive the scholarship. There's no guarantee that you will, of course. And I would take the LSAT just when you're able to study for it and achieve your fullest potential and reach your goals. And so if there is a period where you're going to have a couple of months that are going to be relatively less busy with work or with school or other obligations, that is the optimal time to buckle down on studying for the LSAT and taking it, knocking it out, getting it done. Your LSAT score is good for 5 years. So take the LSAT when you can devote the time to it and achieve your goals. The Rhodes and Marshall scholarships are a separate thing. I suppose that maybe it's hard to study for the LSAT and apply for those scholarships at the same time. Is that possible? Then maybe you devote a bit of time to each one, apply for the scholarships as a break from studying for the LSAT and vice versa. Same goes for studying for applications, by the way. Just scanning through for more questions here. Thanks for all the great questions, folks. Please keep them coming. Alec is saying, why do you say the February LSAT is not too late? Scores release end of February. It's not too late because schools will still take your application when your LSAT score comes back at the end of February. It's not too late because they will still consider your application and still consider the score. And so if you need another month to achieve your fullest potential on the LSAT, it's worth giving yourself that additional time to study for the LSAT and apply for the applications. In other words, law schools have no reason to care about when you applied. They only have reason to care about the score that you apply with, because they are not evaluated based on the time at which you apply. The US News rankings do not consider time of application submitted. They only consider the score that you apply with. And so that's why it doesn't matter. Of course, April's a bit late, June's too late most likely, but schools do not have a hard cutoff for applications in February. Some schools have their deadlines in March, but you can also contact them and ask and say, hey, I'm taking the February LSAT. My scores come back February 25th. Is that too late? In all likelihood, they will say, no, it's not too late. April, they might say it's too late, but for February, most likely not. And by the way, folks, if you're finding this helpful, please do spread the word. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost lives because they can't run ads during them. And so please spread the word. Share this in your group chats, on Reddit, any forums you're in, any Discord channels you're on. Share it to your socials. The more this grows over time, the more I will grow this and expand it over time, do longer lives, add on more days, bring in more instructors from the program to do these as well. Just Dylan's asking, what's your experience with the LSAT out of curiosity? And so I've been personally teaching the LSAT since 2005. I raised up my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. It took me an entire year though, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I had done it properly, I probably could have knocked it out in just a couple of months because the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. In other words, the more that you can spot the tricks and traps, the more you can adopt the test maker's mindset, the easier it becomes. And so over the past 20 years, I've basically been experimenting with different ways to make it easier to study for the LSAT so folks can avoid making the same mistakes that I did. And if I had one big tip studying for the LSAT, it would be review your mistakes in depth, learn from them. Don't just take test after test, hoping something will magically change, because that is ultimately just beating your head against the wall. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So reviewing your mistakes in depth, there's a framework we use at LSAT Unplugged called the Socratic Review Method. It's a cornerstone of my courses and one-on-one coaching programs. The way it works is that we look deep into exactly what you're getting wrong and why. So for example, in logical reasoning, was your mistake in the argument, the question stem, or the choices? Was it a tempting wrong answer choice that appealed to you? Was it an unappealing right answer that discouraged you? You want to get to the root cause so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again. So I hope that was helpful, folks. Again, if you haven't already, please book this free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. I'll be back on Monday afternoon, same time, same place, folks. Thanks so much for joining. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.